Hi, everybody. Welcome to the call tonight. This is our very first discussion on the responsibility of advocacy, talking about the importance of eliminating racist mascots to work towards ending this harmful practice across the country. Before we get started, I wanted to turn the time over to one of our panelists, Geneva Horsechief, who's an enrolled citizen of the Osage Nation. Geneva, go ahead.
Hallway, Dahe, Jaji Abri, Geneva Horsechief Hamilton. I'm glad to be here with everyone for this important matter. I'd like to begin with this statement. Our people are facing a devastating epidemic. According to the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, murder is the third leading cause of death of American Indian and Alaska Native women. As this crisis grows across the country, victims and others affected by these injustices have experienced silence and inaction from government leadership. On the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, we call for justice and action through grassroots efforts. Wear red today to remember and honor the victims, as well as spread awareness of injustices. During this observance and onward, we must continue to rise up, spread awareness, protect Native women and girls, and fight for justice for victims and families. We must fight to protect Native women and girls. Learn how to help to take action for MMIWG through the through NIWRC. We'd like to have a moment of silence.
Wopila, Geneva, thank you for that powerful opening reminder of how important it is for all of us to be strong in our kinship, in our families, in our protection of our sacred sisters, many of whom have become lost to the never-ending circles of violence and assault across the country, and especially on our reservations and off reservation. Thank you for that remembrance today. Before we start off with our discussion, I wanted to do a land acknowledgement. I'm calling in from the Chesapa, the Sacred Black Hills of the Ochete Shakowin, the 7 council fires of the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota speakers. And I'm an enrolled citizen of the Ogallala Sioux tribe. But I wanted to take this time to acknowledge and recognize that all of the land that we currently live on is indigenous lands. Land that has been, for eons of time, have become the centers of our creation stories. The Black Hills Wind Cave, which is now a national park. Our oral stories talk about how the very first Pate Oyate, buffalo people, came as spirits out of Wind Cave and became humans and went on a journey, a spiritual journey. Later, that was brought the Chinupa, or the sacred pipe, to our people. that taught us the ways of Wolakota, bravery, respect, generosity, and wisdom. These are the ways of many of our people, and these are the things that we want to continue to ensure that the responsibility of preserving our language, our history, our culture, our identity, our connection, our kinships are honored, respected. And that's why we want to have this discussion tonight for a very important subject that's been going on for a long, long time. And we have some incredible panelists tonight to talk about this important issue and what we can do as advocates to work towards change. But before we kick into our introduction of our panelists, I want you to take a few moments and go to the chat and do your own land acknowledgement of the indigenous land where you're calling in from. Thank you so much. I'm so excited to have this discussion tonight. This is something that, as leading the Native Alliance at Teach for America, back in September of 2020, our organization actually took a policy stance to call for the elimination of racist mascots in public schools across the country. And so with that call to action and that policy stance, along with so many organizations, we actually got together with several of our partners, for example, the National Indian Education Association, the Center for Native American Youth, TEDNA, Tribal Education Department's National Assembly, the ASU, Indigenous Peoples Alliance, which is a student-led organization, and we're really excited to have one of the representatives from the Alliance here with us tonight. And also my Native Sisters Fire, who have all joined together with us in developing a toolkit with a lot of resources that talk about the necessary responsibility of being an advocate and what we can do to work towards this elimination of this harmful practice. And so tonight with our panelists, we have a really wide range of perspectives. We have Nazona Bitsui, who is a enrolled citizen of the Dene Nation and a student at ASU, who will lend her voice as a student and why the ASU organization has joined with us on this campaign. We have a relative of mine, Simon Moya Smith, who is an enrolled member of the Oglala Sioux tribe, who's a freelance writer and journalist who will speak, on that kind of perspective of media and some of the different things that have happened over the years in order to elevate this campaign. And my good friend, Geneva Horse Chief Hamilton, who is an enrolled citizen of the Osage Nation. And Geneva is coming to us speaking as a parent, as an advocate, as a journalist, activist, coming from the Oklahoma Indian Territory. So thankful for Geneva. And then also we have Terry Bissonnette. Terry is an enrolled citizen of the, she's a member of the Anishinaabe Chippewa Nation, founder, head of school of the American Indian Academy at Denver. And so as we kick off this discussion, I want to go ahead and ask the first question and to our student, Ms. Bitsui. Could you, as a student and somebody that, is, going to school recently, was in high school, why is the elimination of racist mascots important to you and for other students across the country? And then we'll kind of go across to the panel for their perspective in terms of their like career and in what they're doing.
Mhm. All right, thank you for introducing me, Wazi Hanska. Just really quick, I'll introduce myself first with my Diné introduction. Yad e shik e do shidine e she e nejana bitsui yenshe. Shidone shlenegi e na dance gaidine e na shtaja tobahan nishle. Kintlichini bashes chin kia ani dash che do to heglini dashnale. Tonehli de nasha. Kade Chandler, Arizona dishalan. Hello, everyone. My name is Najona Batsui, and I am a student, as Wazi Hanska has introduced me as. I was formerly the facilitator of membership for the Alliance of Indigenous Peoples, which is a student-led coalition at ASU. And to just jump right into the question that Wazi Hanska asked. So when we first started kind of meeting with the Teach for America about this issue, and when they approached us with this, because we've been partnering with Teach for America for a couple years now, and we've established a really good relationship with each other and learned a lot from each other. And for us, it was really important to understand not only how our role as student leaders plays into what we need to do for advocacy. We do a lot of work for our coalition. We represent on behalf of the Indigenous population at ASU. Usually we're the faces for our community. And in order to best serve our community and to best make sure that our issues that matter to us, such as MMIW or land acknowledgement, the movement for getting our land back, they have to start from understanding and based on our personal experiences. So with that being said, as a student and just speaking as a student, it's important to know about this and to think about it and to understand what the issue is and what it comes from. And to me, especially growing up in the city and growing up away from my community and my nation and the people in my family, it was to be confronted by a caricature of and a stereotype, I think was something that I've still had to understand and combat in high school, all the way from elementary school to high school. And it's sometimes I think because I didn't understand what the issue was or how this impacted my life and impacted the way I viewed myself as a Diné person, as an Indigenous person, that's looking back on it now, that's why it's really important, I think, for me to understand and to help others understand why it's not okay. And I remember, I guess if I can recall one specific memory about this in high school, I remember talking about this with my classmates, with my non-native classmates, and none of them understood. They just kind of brushed it off. They kind of said, well, it's honoring, it's not offensive. It's telling me it's not offensive. And at the time, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to react. I didn't know, like, well, they're telling me it's not right, or they're telling me it's right, so maybe it is. And now as a student leader and as a college student and going to be entering into my final semester in college in my undergrad, it's important for me to take my part in this and understand that even if it's just a small coalition at ASU, it's still important to make sure that we can start these conversations amongst our community and amongst our connections that we have at ASU. And it's not just something that I think it stands alone. It kind of ties into the fetishization issues and all these different things that comes with the mascot, comes with the caricature, the character of what this mascot has and the impact that it has on even issues that like MMIW and how it affects us today and as we grow older. And that's something that I've learned in my personal experience with it. And I don't want to talk too long, I'm sorry, but I just feel that that's kind of why it mattered to us when Wazi Hanska came to us and wanted to partner with us with this issue. And I can talk more about what we'll do as a coalition, but that's just from my perspective as a student.
Same question, Geneva. Why is the elimination of racist mascots important to you?
Well, before I begin, I think I should introduce myself. I did earlier, but I didn't really talk about a little bit more about myself, which is that I was formerly the communications manager for the National Indian Education Association, which is the one of the largest and oldest advocacy groups, organizations for Native students. And currently, I was recently recruited to a position as a science research policy analyst for the Tribal Resource Health Office for the National Institutes of Health. And well, I'm very honored to be here, and I was listening to everything that Najoni was saying, and I agree with her saying that a lot of these issues are interconnected. I mean, and why the elimination is important to me is because she's a student, she's talking as a student, and she's saying, I can see how all these things are related, and it's important that we listen to our students because no matter what age they are, they can see these relationships, and those relationships mean that they can see where their stance is in the world, and they are understanding maybe their power or their voice or their barriers at the same time at whatever age it is. And that's concerning, and it should always be concerning because we want our children to have the same opportunities, and we want them to have equality in the classroom. We want there to be equity, and this does not provide equity at all. And I think a lot of it goes back to the issues that are all relative one to one another. But one of the more important things is, how is this affecting our students long term? And I know that a lot of us have seen a statement from the American Psychological Association. It came out a long time ago, but they basically said that they disagree with the use of mascots, and they know that it's detrimental to children and their education, and they know that it has long-term effects. And it doesn't only affect the Native students, it affects all these students. It affects the people around them and how they view us. And just like Najoni said, it leads to fetishization. And in the classroom, as a Native boy or a Native girl, you don't want that to be occurring on any kind of level. That's very uncomfortable. And I just think that it leads to lateral violence for a lot of our students. And that is another alarming issue, and why it should be eliminated.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the reminder to also do an introduction for yourselves too as you go into this question. Simon, can you share with us introduction and also why elimination of racist mascots is important for your work?
Yeah, Simon Amachiapolo Namalakota, Naspayola. Le Yuhan Wipiki Washte. Orele mi raza. I have both, right? My mom is Chicana. My dad is Oglala from Pine Ridge. If I can echo a little bit on what Geneva was just saying, she's right. In 2005, the American Psychological Association came out and said that there's empirical proof that these images, the language, the iconography, has it harms the mental health and stability of children. And just like Geneva said, not just Native kids, but all children, right? So ultimately, at the end of the day, whenever I'm going toe to toe with some of these people, especially when I was living in DC, they were like, well, you're just a party pooper. This is a PC issue. Where were you guys 30 years ago? It's like, well, you weren't listening to us 30 years ago. The difference is there's technology right now where we can respond in real time, right? We all know that reservations were originally established as prison camps, move them as far away as possible. But now, because of this, that idea that we're not going to respond, this is all very new to them. So the technology is new, our protests are not new. So ultimately, and at least personally for me, I grew up in Denver and East Los Angeles. And in East LA, there's Griffiths Middle School, and there were the Indians. And so our dipshit of a principal would go on to the morning announcement, and he would say, "Good morning, Injuns and Injunettes." And I went back and I told my mom, and then she got the Southern California Indian Center involved. And then, I think SoCal AIM got involved. And so they stopped doing it. So for me, it started then. So that was about 1994. So I think I've been doing this in one form or another, in the streets or in the newsroom for quite a while.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Terry, welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. I apologize. Just off the bat, I'm trying to do mom duty as well as professional duty. So I'm actually sitting in my car and at my son's lacrosse practice. So I apologize. But Terry Bissonnette, Indigenous Ganoje Kaning and Dojaba Makwato Dem. My name is Terry Bissonnette. I am the founder and head of school of American Indian Academy of Denver. I am Ganoje Kaning Anishinaabe from the Great Lakes region. And I'm very honored to be here. Super excited to see Geneva. I wanted to just wave to Geneva. I'm always glad to see her. And I want to start out my comments with two definitions of words, because I think where I always go when this issue is brought up is really looking back at the historical origins of these types of mascots and symbols and things like that. The first word is marginalization. Marginalization means the treatment of a person, group, or concept as insignificant or peripheral. And the second one is subjugation, the action of bringing someone or something under domination or control. So when we talk about colonization and we talk about colonizing an entire population of people, it's very, very important. One of the most important tools of the colonizer is to make those people the other, right? To subjugate and to marginalize, to make them insignificant, to make them inhuman. And that's what this mascots and symbols and the use of Native American imagery and caricatures and all of that kind of stuff is a very important tool to marginalize and subjugate. It is steeped very deeply in white supremacy. These mascots, many of them originated between the years 1900 and 1950, which is when our populations were at its lowest. We were assumed, it was assumed in mainstream society that we were going to cease to exist altogether. And so to add insult to injury in a white supremacy landscape, the decision somehow was made, or it became popular, for this idea of the conquering of the Wild West. Now we're going to honor the noble savage that we just got done, eradicating off the face of the earth. And that is really, really important to me to understand and to be able to share to people that this is not something that was just by chance. It was by design. And that is, when we talk about white supremacy, which, has been, thank goodness, a pretty sustainable conversation these days, about the, white privilege and the systems of racism and white supremacy in our country. This is a part of it. And it's really, really important. And that's what makes it so damaging and so detrimental. And I think for a lot of people who do not understand that history and do not understand those tools of the colonizer, it's hard to imagine that something, it seems so silly at times, right? It's so innocuous, like it seems like, how could that bother anyone? But when you really think about the history of where it comes from, it's very, very important. And like I said, it's not by accident.
Wow, so true, Terry. In 2014, we had our very first really startup of advocacy at Teach for America to work towards, having this policy stance with eliminating racist mascots. And so me and a few friends got together and we did this video I wanted to share with you. I think it fits in good with a lot of people thinking of natives as past.
I am a firefighter.
I am a grandmother.
I am a college student.
I am not.
I am not.
I am not a mascot.
I am Lakota. I am an educator and advocate.
I am not a mascot.
I am not a mascot.
I am not a mascot.
I am an Operation Enduring Freedom combat medic veteran.
I am not a mascot.
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 Thank you. And I think that goes to what our panelists were really, talking about is
I am a firefighter.
a lot, a lot of the thinking of, why people look at, mascots in a way of honoring people is they look at Native people, Indigenous people in past, like we don't exist anymore, museum pieces or a defeated people. And so media has a lot of like influence in terms of like trying to get the word out, right? I think, and so Simon, what is the role of media in terms of like helping to educate people about the harmful effects? And what are some of the things that you've kind of run into, in terms of like trying to get the word out?
Oh man, it's a shit show. A lot of people don't know that the most male, most white industry in the US is journalism. It's not banking, it's not oil and gas, it's journalism. So having to try to explain to these old white men why something's important and why we should use different language or why we shouldn't have run the R word for as long as mainstream legacy media has, it's an uphill battle. I mean, I've had to take on pride swallowing moments just to get a story out there when I was at NBC at 30 Rock in the breaking news. It's still antiquated language. Just for an example, if I am in the newsroom, it's not even breaking news. It's just a story maybe on Thanksgiving. They won't let me run the word invader. It has to be pilgrim or settler. And that doesn't make any fucking sense. Sorry. I'm gonna cut. I can't speak without cussing. I don't know how that works. But anyway, my mother, she's gonna smack me if she hears me. Anyway, it's one of those things where it's like, look, as journalists, we're supposed to report the facts. And the facts are that they invaded. They're calling them pilgrims and settlers is PC. So when we're covering things like mascots, unfortunately, those stories are far and few between. And just like all other indigenous stories. So I remember one time I got a friend in Denver named Tessa McLean, and I'm there in New York at 30 Rock. And she calls and says, hey, we're gonna have a protest against the Washington football team when they come to play the Denver Broncos. And she goes, could you do a story? And I said, hell yes. I go to my editor and he's like, well, no. And I said, is there any way we could do this story? And he says, if 100 people show up, we'll do the story. I called Tessa right back. I said, you gotta give me 100 people. If you can get me 100 people, I can do the story. And she goes, I can do it. And she did it. And so I walked back over to the desk. I'm like, I guess there's 100 people there or whatever. And he's like, all right, go ahead and do it. Like he didn't even care or even remember that I pitched that story. And so that's what we have to do as Indigenous people in newsrooms. And that goes to things that even like murdered and missing Indigenous women. Getting those stories out there are very, very difficult because we're dealing with that white male colonial mentality. And here's this Indigenous person coming to them, trying to explain to somebody who doesn't know diddly maybe on the subject, why this is important. So I'm always an advocate for getting more Indigenous people into these newsrooms because just like the comedian George Carlin said, we think in language. So the quality of our thoughts are only gonna be as good as the quality of our language. And people read the words. And so if we use the proper words and explain why something is harmful, especially to children, I think that'll change, and that'll add, there'll be more motion to remove and eradicate all of these mascots wholesale.
Yeah, definitely. The use of, especially the use of social media over the past few years, I've just seen, something that I never thought I'd live to see is the Washington Redskins eliminating their mascot, and that harmful, history of where that word even came from. And so, but I think one of the struggles that we do have as Native Indigenous people is, where do you draw the line in terms of elimination and an advocacy of it? Because I know, like in Arizona, in Oklahoma, where there's large population of Native students, a lot of history and connection to the indigenous land and tribes there. We do have many tribal schools that have Indian mascot as logos, and as their symbols of their school and their team. In that, I'm interested to hear from Nazona. How do you talk to our own Native people in terms of having a tribal school that has a mascot like Redskins? Because I know there's Navajo schools that have Redskins as mascots, and that I know with our campaign we're not trying to convince tribes to change their mascot. We're focused on public schools. But can you speak a little bit about that? Why do our tribes continue to honor mascots, racist or Native mascots?
Mm-hmm. I can only speak from my Diné perspective. But for me, well, where I'm from, a majority of my cousins, they went to this high school in Tuba City. And Tuba City, the high school name is Tuba City Warriors. And it's kind of, I'm not sure if there is a school that goes by Redskins. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure there isn't. But in even our community college, the tribal community college, they're called the Diné College Warriors. So I think the conversation is different around that. My grandpa, Wilson O'Ronald, he's a really knowledgeable elder, and my sister took one of his classes on Navajo philosophy. And the way that we, I guess, understand it and explain it, for Navajos, we have, I guess, like a different understanding of who we are, and we call ourselves Nabaha, which is like a warrior. So you're like a warrior spirit. And I think in that way, when we kind of control our narrative and it's a way of explaining our worldview, I guess, in incorporating that into our education and westernized education. And I think that's a completely different way of looking at it, because it's, for us, we are warriors. That's the way that he explained it, is like not being a Nabaha, and it can also mean like Navajo, like that's the way that the word Navajo came around, is Nabaha, or along the origin of that is what our role is in our society as Diné people. So I think that it's a lot of it. Each tribe has a different meaning and explanation for that. Obviously, that doesn't totally explain everything for Diné schools and the way that they choose to use the words warriors and scouts as their traditional, or not the traditional, sorry, the school mascots. But I think that the conversation is different, and it takes some of that cultural knowledge to understand why, and why the conversation is different versus the Redskins, which is not what we call ourselves. I mean, some of us do, but that's not the way. It's not in the same way that the white the way that the Redskins term was used by white people and the way that it was intended for. And I think that's the main difference, is that there's no, that those types of names and those type of connotations of the non-native made up mascots doesn't have any sort of meaning towards us in a way that is meaningful, versus the word like for warriors, for Navajo people who think of ourselves as actual warriors, and that mindset. So I think that there's just a world of a difference in the thinking and the mentality of it. But it's sometimes it can be hard for our own Native people to also grasp that idea too, because we don't want to say we don't want to think there's like a double standard too. We have to sort of be mindful of that, I think. And I think that's where we have to understand. And for me, I'm also educating myself, listening and hearing from everyone else. But understanding that our role is to educate not just other non-Native people, but also even our own communities that may not know or may not have this other knowledge about where this came from, and why it feels the way it feels when people use those terms and those when we see that imagery. So that's just my answer.
Geneva, thank you so much. Geneva, in Oklahoma, with so many tribes, federally recognized tribes, what there are 38, 39 federally recognized tribes. And just the history of Indian Territory and the land rush celebrations that happen in our schools and that. What are some of the challenges of like trying to work towards elimination of racist mascots when you have so many different tribes and schools, so much of that history? What are some of those challenges that you see? You're on mute.
Oh, okay. The biggest challenge that I see is the lame excuse that always comes up, which is nostalgia. People have this claim that they, my grandma, everybody, we've all been savages, right? And I think that everybody, even though they might know, and you hope they might know at their core that it's wrong, they are still holding on to and finding excuses, because it's kind of like just going along with what everybody else says, because the unpopular opinion for a lot of small communities where these mascots are prevalent in rural Oklahoma, which is, Indian country, a lot of Indian country around here. It's that's that pressure, the small town pressure, and just kind of like get along and go along. But then now you have a lot of people talking about it, and Oklahoma is actually making a huge difference. We have a lot of grassroots efforts. We have a wonderful organization, and here where a lot of people are constantly working towards changing the names for the racist mascots, because we have several. I mean, we have savages, Indians, bucks, Redskins, and that's what I know of. But I mean, it's almost, you could like throw a rock and hit a school, right? With the mascot name, with the offensive mascot, including just like down the road from me, here on my reservation, one of the schools is the Bucks, and that's after an Indian buck, which is the term. I mean, if you know where the terminology comes from, it comes from when natives were hunted and they were listed under, different types of skins. And so like you have your deer skin, your other different types of hides, and then you have your Indian buck, and then there's a price tag on that. And that's where that term comes from. But it's become a term of pride in one of our community, in one of my tribe's communities. And it's been brought up by students before, because there was a young lady who was very traditional, and a few years ago she was at a football game, and she was tired of them wearing the school colors and like in headdresses, and the cheerleaders would dress up and then they would loop around and everything like that. And it's offensive. And she called it out, and it turned into a big argument between, you know, the white community and the Native community, and everybody just kind of, and you know, then just kind of went away. People quit talking about it, and she ended up switching schools. But I think a lot of it is just people are uncomfortable with the conversation, and it just takes a lot of bringing it up, like we saw at Union Schools in Tulsa, which is like a huge school, and they finally changed the name Redskin. But it was a lot of pressure and a lot of media pressure and a lot of social media pressure. So I think that if it wasn't for the media, we wouldn't be seeing these things happen.
You just brought back a memory, because my first day as a teacher, I was just hired at Rapid City Central High School, and it was the first day of teacher in service, you know, before school starts and everything. And me and one of my colleagues, my friend Martin Redbear, we were walking down the hallway, and another teacher came up and she said, "Oh, it's so wonderful to see you two bucks working here. We need more diversity." we
Oh my.
we stopped just in our tracks, and I said to Martin, "What the heck did I get myself into here?" Yeah, it's that was wild. You know, and you're right. We're seeing some really great, you know, strides and movement, things that I never thought I would see, you know, with some changes and trying to address the invisibility and erasure and address the history, right? That's so important of Indigenous people here. And one of the things that we're doing with our elimination of racist mascots toolkit is we actually are tracking through our, you know, government affairs and legislative team the number of states that are actually taking action in terms of, like, you know, forcing or having legislation that forces public schools to eliminate mascots. So we're seeing that happen in a few different states. Something that you know, I'm really honored to work with Terry as a school board member at the American Indian Academy at Denver. And Terry, could you share with us a little bit about why our school took a stance to support the Senate bill in Colorado, and kind of walk us through a little bit about why that was so important that we took that stance?
Sure. It's been, I mean, I wasn't really aware that the bill had been introduced, and then it was brought to my attention by some of our parents who are pretty active, you know, activists, and really keep up on the state legislature and what's happening. So Colorado's kind of interesting. We are a blue state, and I think, you know, it's been a while since the Democrats have kind of been in charge of both the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. But we're really a purple state. The majority of the population is on the Front Range, so on the eastern side of the Rocky Mountains. But the rest of the state is red, 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 and in a lot of rural areas. And so, you know, you would almost think that this would be a no-brainer for this legislation. And what the legislation is basically going after purse strings and saying, okay, if you can't be convinced and cajoled and, you know, persuaded to eliminate racist mascots, then we're going to impose a fine for every month that you continue to have the racist mascot. And we've got, I actually did a search. We do have one school in Lamar that is the Savages. The rest of them it's usually Indians or Reds or something like that. And of course, and just like Geneva, had said, a lot of it is, oh, this is tradition, and you're trying to get rid of our tradition, and da 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 da. And really, even though we have, we're, I guess, more liberal elected officials, it has still been really difficult. It's a very hot button issue. And you do hear just primarily this tradition. It's kind of, I think what was made it so important for our school to make a public statement is that we are a one-of-a-kind school in Colorado, and Colorado is somewhat unique. I think if everybody thinks about Denver, that you don't really consider it Indian country, right? And it's really because the tribes here were violently kicked out of the state, and so you have the two Ute tribes that are in the far southwest corner of the state. And I often say, because I lived up in South Dakota for 11 years, and I was witness and experienced blatant racism up there, but here in Colorado, we're just invisible. And when you say Native Americans, people are like, there's Native Americans here. We're just willfully ignored and just invisible to everyone. And that again is by design. That is not by accident. And so, I think that one of the things about our school is about reclamation. It's about healing. It's about taking a stance. And really, as I often say, we've existed here for a long time, but we haven't had a presence here. And this school is really about reclaiming our presence. And I was actually just visiting with some ladies from Wyoming Indian School this today, and we were talking about that. Our school, we want to invite the 20 plus tribes that legitimately claim this area as ancestral homeland. We would like to invite them home. To do a land acknowledgement, to come home and to, continue to exist in this space. And so I think these types of issues that have a direct impact on our children, we have 47% of our student population is Native American, which for Denver is amazing. I mean, that's a really, really high percentage. And because we're scattered all over the place in the Denver metro area. But I think it's just really important for us to always take a stance on things that directly impact our youth, and to create a space where, we are reclaiming our presence here. And so that's why I think it's so important.
Thank you, Terry. And thank you for your advocacy and supporting that elimination of racist mascots in Colorado, and especially for the meat that's attached to the bill is pretty significant. I do a lot of the social media campaign on the Native Alliance, and the other day I ran across a shared Twitter statement by Senator Rick Santorum, and I wanted to read a part of it, but I also wanted to show the video, which is going to really, I think, add to what Terry was saying about the erasure and in education. So Sarah, could you go ahead and play that?
Settled predominantly by people who were coming to practice their faith. They came here because they were not allowed to practice their particular faith in their own country. And so they came here mostly from Europe, and they set up a country that was based on Judeo-Christian principles. When I say Judeo-Christian, the Mosaic laws, 10 commandments, and the teachings of Jesus Christ. The morals and teachings of Jesus Christ. That's what our founding documents are based upon. It's in our DNA. If you think of other countries like Italy and Greece and China and Turkey and places like that, they've all sort of changed over time. I mean, they've been there for millennia in many cases. And their culture has sort of evolved over time. But not us. We came here and created a blank slate. We birthed a nation from nothing. I mean, there's nothing here. I mean, yes, we have Native Americans, but candidly, that there isn't much Native American culture in American culture. It was born of the people who came here pursuing religious liberty to practice their faith, to live as they ought to live, and have the freedom to do so. Religious liberty. Those are the two bulwarks of America, faith and freedom. I mean, you hear it all the time about faith and freedom, faith and freedom. But it is what makes America unique in the world.
Simon, does that surprise you when you've seen that video?
Oh, hell no. I feel like I need a shower now. So no, and I just to go back like what Terry was saying, it's like, so right now I'm visiting family on right next to the Acoma res, right next to the Laguna Pueblo res. But I was just in northern Minnesota covering the Stop Line 3 fight up there. And there was this one white lady in this small town of Duluth, and she looked at me and couldn't figure out what I am. It was a guessing game. She was lost. And she goes, "Can I ask you, what's your ethnicity?" And I said, "All right, well, I'm Chicano." And she was like, "What is that?" And I was like, "All right, I'm Oglala." And didn't know what that one was either. So I had to dumb it down. I was like indigenous. And then she was like, Native American. She goes, "Got it." You know, that kind of attitude. And we have to deal with that as indigenous people all the time. So this dipshit going out there whitewashing the narrative, that's something that you can read in American history textbooks. You're not going to get anything more PC than an American history textbook. People blame us all the time, like all of us on this panel, for being PC when we're talking about mascots. But again, you're not going to get anything more PC than an American history textbook. So this is not surprising. His mentality and conditioning young, and that was a whole room of young conservative, kids. That kind of conditioning is why so many states are trying to ban ethnic studies, right? Because they think that they're breeding a whole generation of anti-American. No, it's just you're winnowing out all the bullshit and putting in the facts. So of course they don't want to acknowledge that their ancestors, committed a genocide against our people. If no one was here, if it was a blank slate, then they didn't do anything wrong. So they're just trying to absolve themselves of what they would call their sins. Real quick, I don't know if it's going to be prompted by a question, but I really wanted to say this part. I can't remember who mentioned it. When people say that we're honoring you with mascots, mess with them. I love doing this. Be like, cool. In a perfect world, let's say that you were honoring us. But we have to remember that mascots are also meant to be belittled. The jackasses on the other side of the field aren't honoring us. The jackasses on the other side of the field are putting up signs that says, "Send them on a Trail of Tears Part 2. So no matter their good intentions, there are some very adverse, negative, vicious impacts on our people.
Now, Shona, what was your reaction to that video?
Well, my reaction, I think for me, I think it's kind of sad to say, but like I said, from my perspective and my experience in high school and even elementary school, when I first moved from the reservation to the city, it kind of just desensitized, I guess. I guess that speaking from a youth perspective, you're kind of, for me, me and my sister, we grew up like that and around like very conservative people, and having to explain that we are still here, we are Native, we're from this Arizona, and we're our parents are both like Native people. So it just kind of reminded me of the type of attitude and the type of thinking that people have when they talk about us and talk about Indigenous people. And I think for me, it makes me think about too, I'm a public policy student, and in my classes, it's kind of funny because, my professors, they like to make a point about the way immigration impacted American public policy, or the way that our founding fathers, our founding whatever, impacted how we live now. And so when I speak up and I say, well, the American democracy was like influenced by Haudenosaunee, the Iroquois Confederacy, and that I didn't come from an immigrant. I came from, my people were here for a long time. And it sometimes that the curriculum doesn't account for having me in that class. I think that's kind of something that I've had to just come to terms with, and I've had to explain to professors over and over again. However, seeing this video just shows like that sort of ignorance and that thinking exists in my realm and what I want to do in my career. So it's just really not surprising. It's not surprising at all. And I think that in a way that it sort of makes me feel a little bit, I don't want to say I'm disheartened, actually. I want to say that it makes me a little bit more tougher in that lens, to be able to just be like, no, I know who I am, and I know that you're wrong. And I wish I was there. I wish I was there to like say something, in the way that I have to now in my classes in public policy, and trying to correct what people think. So I can talk forever about this, but that was my reaction.
Yeah. Thank you for your voice, and, as a student and in your classes, because it's important. It's hard. It's hard to, constantly be there to correct. I think it's going to be a hard time, and it's always been a hard time for those of us in the education field, and seeing a movement from many states to really erase any discussion, lessons on social justice, Native, Black, Asian, Latinx culture, and really approach a more America first, praising the contributions of the founding fathers, that type of curriculum. I feel like it's really going to put many educators at risk, who are gonna like continue to try to teach truth to power and to push back on this movement. I know here in South Dakota, we're having a curriculum that's being, really pushed by America First, the Anglo-Saxon view that Rick Santorum just talked about. What can we do as educators, Geneva, to, ensure that Indigenous history isn't erased? What can we do in our school systems to ensure that that doesn't happen?
I just want to make sure I was unmuted. What I've seen happening in Oklahoma is a lot of strong parent voices coming forward, and students sometimes holding their teachers accountable. I have a niece who was in Oklahoma City, and she took pictures a couple weeks ago of the chalkboard where the teacher had wrote savages as part of the curriculum and description of the Native people who were here in state history lesson, and she's in the 9th grade. So and immediately there were advocates responding to that social media post. And I think that we need to encourage people to use their cameras, use their voices, do what other people are doing to get attention to these issues, because it does make a difference. We need to be just as active recording these injustices happening as anybody else recording injustices happening to them. And we just need to not be silent about it, and stand up for our people when they say something, especially when it's our students.
Harry, as a principal head of school, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I actually, there's three things that I think about. There's so many stories as students, as former students, knowing students, raising students, but even being parents of students. All of us have those stories of having to go into a classroom to advocate for our kids, or having our students feel like they have to advocate for themselves. And one of the reasons why I think that schools like ours are really important is because it shouldn't be left up to the individual, right? We shouldn't have to be putting that responsibility on individual Native parents or individual Native students. It should be part of our systemic effort to change things, so that it is a systemic effort, as opposed to, you know, drops in the bucket here and there, trying to educate as many people as we can. The other thing that I think about is that it comes down to teacher training programs. You know, we've got to, I mean, it's 2021. Like, I mean, come on, they're still teaching, you know, in 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. I mean, it's time to train teachers in a better way with accurate history. So I think teacher training programs in our higher education systems. And then the third thing, and this, you know, and I saw it happen in Wyoming. So I know that if it can happen in Wyoming, it can happen anywhere. Really a push for Indian education for all. You know, Montana is a perfect example of the impact that can have, of really educating youth with accurate history, a focus on the original inhabitants and first peoples of what is now the United States. And, you know, they tell stories up in the state of Montana of youth, actually white youth, actually demanding change and demanding a better representation of their, you know, their Native friends and their their neighboring Native communities, because they know that history, because they know the truth. And they will say, it's not us, we understand, it's our parents' generation, it's our grandparents' generation that has such a hard time. So Indian education for all, taking control of our own education, the education of our children, is super important. And then, you know, really pushing teacher training programs so that we have a bigger impact. And, you know, the majority of white female teachers that come into our elementary school, give them a better education so that it's more accurate, and they can stop perpetuating these false narratives.
Thanks, Terry. And I think one of the things is that a lot of people ask is, well, what can I do? What can I do to help? How can I be an ally, a co-conspirator? And one of the things that was really important when we launched the policy to eliminate racist mascots in schools, you know, with Teach for America, we have, you know, close to over 6,000 teachers, you know, that are in the classroom across the, you know, regions across the country, a large alumni network. But it was really important that our, you know, our partners, organizations on the ground who've been doing this a lot longer than we have, right, you know, to really lead the campaign. And so that's why it was important to have, you know, different partners and organizations with this. But the one thing that I was like trying to figure out early on is, what could we really do in terms of having something tangible in the hands of students and educators, school board members, you know, just people that just wanted to figure out what could be the steps. And that's why we got together and created this toolkit, an actual resource for people to go in and look at why this advocacy is so important. Partnering with the Center for Native American Youth, we wanted to ensure that we had, you know, artwork that was Indigenous led, the perspectives. So we have some, you know, beautiful artwork showcasing students across the country with their kind of their vision of what this really means to them in terms of, you know, advocacy and sharing out. And so if we could click on this toolkit, I wanted to share with you all a little bit of something that what this is really trying to like dive into. The eliminate racist mascots is the continued use of Native people and imagery of mascots in K-12 sports is rooted in long and harmful history. Mascots perpetuate racial stereotypes and cultural misappropriation, which negatively impacts the identity and psychological development of Indigenous children. And all of our panelists spoke to that, you know, the APA, you know, Stephanie Freiberg's research, a lot of, you know, information out there, just how harmful this is. So a part of this campaign is you actually can take a pledge. And so if we click on the pledge, it leads you to another link where you can put down your, you know, here's what the pledge, we pledge to do the work necessary to remove these harmful symbols. We pledge to share the call for systematic changes, pledge to courageously call upon school leaders to inform the school board of local, of our concerns and propose solutions. So you can, you know, sign the information on the pledge. And then once you do that, it actually takes you to another link where you can have access to the background, you know, the pictures of the artwork. You can put that on your computer screen. You can share it out. It's a beautiful artwork. It has a list of our different partners. We have to actually add my Native Sisters Fires logo to this as we build out our more partners. But we also have to look at other organizations, you know, so it's not, you know, more non-Native organizations need to step up, you know, and be a part of this campaign to eliminate racist mascots. It deals with a lot of money. Like the logos come on jerseys, on murals, on all of that part. So once people, you know, are looking at making this change to eliminate, you know, there is that cost of, you know, the turnover of all those things that come with it. So there's a lot to this. We want to make sure when people, you know, are going into these, you know, these schools and looking to eliminate the mascots, they know the right steps. So we don't want to, you know, have any teachers fired over this, any students expelled out of school, because there's a right way to do the advocacy. And it's through the education, it's through, you know, building coalitions, educating people. And so as you go through the toolkit, it kind of shares a lot of those different resources. Sarah, can we go through there? Do we have to fill that part out before we can move? And all of you too, if you know, to share out this link, we can put it in the chat. And, you know, so if you're, you know, want to take the pledge, if you want to share this out, you can. And then once you take it, it has a page where you can actually get a sticker or a gift as being one of, you know, an ally in the pledge. I think we have to fill that out again. Okay, and then we have the download the toolkit. We won't go through the whole toolkit, but I just wanted to share, you know, the links that are all part of it. There's the research, the information behind the campaign. We have some lot of great resources and quotes, different studies, articles. how to go through the policy changes of it, starting with brave conversations, change the school mascot, the different policy changes. Yeah, so after we before we wrap up, we want to, put that in the chat, share it out broadly with your networks, tweet, get on your social media accounts, tweet your support, or for the elimination of racist mascots. We can help get the word out. And one of the great things about this too is it's focused for students and educators. So that's what we wanted, because that's where that change comes from. A movement within the school and the community. So as we get ready to close out, I wanted to ask our panelists if they have any closing thoughts or statements they want to share before we Doksha, okay? In Lakota, we don't have a word for good night or goodbye, so we say Doksha, means later. So Ashona, do you want to do a closing statement?
Yeah, I don't mind. So I just feel very thankful to even be here and to be able to speak a little bit about my student experience. And I would just say on behalf of the Alliance of Indigenous Peoples, we're very excited, and we're really trying to plan something that will be very meaningful for our community, not just for the Indigenous community, but also for all of the whole population, really. We just want to go big or go home, and make sure that we get to utilize our resources and our really tight network that we have at ASU. And I don't want to spoil anything. Obviously, none of you guys are at ASU, but we are in the talks of working with the Labriola Center, which is the Native American archiving, or it's like the library for Native students at ASU. So we're really excited to see how this campaign can bring different organizations and different people together, and to see what kind of work that we do out of it. So I would just say that I'm really looking forward to this year and to the way that our Native American Heritage Month will play out as well. And we're really excited to get the ball rolling on this and start really educating our peers and ourselves and our community members on this issue, and to make a real impact with it. Thank you. Hagonet too, or Hagoshin, I should say, for Navajo.
Yeah, we can't wait to get back on campus to meet with everybody in person again. Thank you for working with us on the campaign, and good luck in your summer. Geneva, do you have any closing thoughts or call to actions for us?
Yeah, I wanted to just kind of remind everybody that these mascots were kind of born from an era of bigotry and racism that is right now being called to task. And I think that we really need to push on this and make sure that we're all aware that there's a lot of power right now in what we can do to change things, and that it's important that we do it, because our students are the only ones who are going to suffer, and everything is pretty much related, as we've already kind of gone over. Also, I want to thank Teach for America and the Native Alliance, and also you, Wazi Hanska. Thank you for this opportunity. Also the other panelists, and it's really good to see Terry anytime. And I hope to see you somewhere soon. And I hope that everybody is well in their communities.
Thank you, Geneva. Terry, do you have any closing thoughts or call to action?
I think, some of us have been in this work for years and years. I got arrested back in like 1992, protesting the Columbus Day Parade here in Denver. And it can be very exhausting, and it can be very disheartening. But I always remember that quote, you know, the arc of history is long, but it bends towards justice. And I think that that's what we have to keep in mind, and, you know, and just keep moving forward and always think about, you know, doing the best that we can to make the lives in the future, you know, the future lives of our children and our grandchildren, you know, as to better their lives as much as possible. So, and I want to thank Wazi Hanska for inviting me, and for Teach for America for doing this campaign. I think it's super important. And, you know, my dad used to say, you got to make hay when the sun is shining. And I think right now with the pandemic and with, you know, this spotlight on the impact, the negative impact of white supremacy, I think, you know, that's really, the time is ripe. I think many of our relatives in the mainstream society have a much more open mind and have open ears more than they ever have before. And so, you know, those are all encouraging signs.
And Terry, thank you so much for your work at the school. And we're getting ready to celebrate the very first successful year of the American Indian Academy at Denver. I can't wait to see the students on May 27th. I'm gonna be there, and thank you for the opportunity to serve on the board. It's just been an incredible experience and journey, and thank you so much for all that you're doing with the school down there in Denver, and for taking that stance on the bill in Colorado. Simon,
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you, Terry. Simon, do you have any closing thoughts or call to action for us?
A lot, but I'll winnow it down for if I don't know how who's on the call aside from the panelists and the natives, but if you're not native, I usually tell people to drop everything you think you know about indigenous peoples and start over again, because there is so much bullshit and lies woven into that whitewashed American narrative, the Santorum narrative, that it's difficult for people to know what's true, what's false, right? But additionally, I always encourage people to be responsible, pick your battles wisely, but it's okay to make people uncomfortable. Like, you know, somebody comes in and they're wearing like, you know, the Fighting Sioux shirt, and you're at a party. You're like, go up to them and tell them why. You know what I mean? We don't have to just go like that. We can address them, you know, go and fine. If they're uncomfortable, good, leave. You want to learn, leave. Have those conversations, because that is the only way that some of these people will learn. And some of them are just going to reject the facts. They're going to be dipshits, and they're going to, you know, the whole legacy, what am I going to pass on to my grandkids, that type of idea. But there are going to be people that go, I just didn't know. Now I know. And at least you educated one person. And so it like I said, be responsible. You don't want to end up throwing blows, but you definitely want to at least approach them and say, look, this is why that is wrong. And people will learn through discomfort. I love making people uncomfortable.
Thank you. Yeah, it's a conversation that we have to have, and it's about education, right? I want to thank the panelists for being here tonight. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives and family, school, community, all of those things. Thank you so much for what a great conversation. And I learned so much. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for our guests that joined us tonight. This is actually going to be recorded, and we're going to put it on our Native Alliance YouTube channel. So you can go to there and check out the video again. I want to thank the best boss in the world, Sarah Ha, for being here tonight and being tech support and getting all our videos. We were kind of panicking a little bit, but she's a rock star and hit a home run. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks, everybody. Have a great night and keep up the good fight. Love you.